On this week's episode of the First Case Expert series, we're continuing the conversation with our perioperative instrument coordination expert, Jeff Wertz. And if you're just tuning in, this is a 12-part interview series that is literally covering perioperative instrument coordination. And Jeff, today we are really going to learn how knowledge is power in the OR, right?
Yep, that's the plan. I think it's kind of building off our last conversation where we kind of put to this point, we put the building blocks in place of setting up those meetings, working with the teams, identifying, the why behind what we're doing, and trying to find little ways to celebrate little wins along the way. But now we want to kind of dig in a little bit more into what we're measuring. So we know the whys of this. So I think on the last episode, we were talking about the, error reporting being one of those. I think that's a pretty easy why that directly impacts the patient safety, on-time starts, things like that, ability to get procedures completed. But, what are we going to actually measure with this? Because you can have all the meetings you want, and until you're getting some of those measurements in place, you're not making any progress. So I think it's really important to get some of that, some substantive analytics or key performance indicators that are agreed upon between the departments. And I'd really love to, hear what your experience has been in that. I think you have some of that experience on the error reporting, but what's your experience been with that?
Well, first, I want to highlight that you said something extremely important that doesn't often get looked at. And you said key performance indicators that are shared between the departments. Because a lot of times our ORs have our KPIs or key performance indicators, and the sterile processing department has theirs, but they're not always aligned and working together for a common goal, even though individually they are great quality indicators that we need to be looking at. But if we are coming together with a common purpose and we have the shared goals, then suddenly there's a lot more motivation, I think, to really see an improvement. One of the biggest KPIs that I've seen in any of the department I've worked in obviously had to do with on-time starts, but that would be broken down into errors that might have been related to whether our case carts were pulled correctly, depending on the preference cards, if they were correct, or if we had errors in our trays. Did we have holes in blue wrap? Did we have an indicator that was missing? Did we have a tray where there was bioburden present? Multiple different issues that in and of themselves would stop us from being able to start on time. So we were looking at the big picture of the on-time start and the efficiency, but also breaking that down into the granular, well, what's causing it and how can we fix it? So those were some of the things that we were paying attention to when we were looking at our key performance indicators.
Those are kind of standards of where people start off at or kind of try to focus on. But it's, again, how granular you go ends up being, I think, sometimes can become a challenge for consistency because it becomes so time consuming and you had time in that one procedure, but you didn't in another. And I think setting the expectation of at the very least, we're going to collect there was an issue here so that it can be reviewed and monitored. And I think the error reporting is what we've touched on mostly to this point, but I think that there's a lot of other pieces that can be valuable to both. I think you mentioned a great point of having these be collaborative goals that are monitored or indicators, key performance indicators that are shared, because there just hasn't been that translation between the departments for them to understand. Because oftentimes, frankly, SPDs, the only measurements that they are looked at consistently is productivity, and that doesn't mean a whole lot at a lot of facilities other than we want more staff. So how do we look at more substantive information like, shortages of inventory? That's stuff that can be reviewed and reported on of SPD keeping track of how many times they're having to do same day turns. I mean, there's little things like that. How many loaners are coming through late that impact those start times? How many times are they dealing with sets that are sent back down? I mean, all those are transactions or interactions between the departments or other stakeholders that can create challenges. And I think a lot of people struggle in that they just don't have any baseline to go off of. And so, again, they let perfect be the enemy of good, and they start thinking further down the road of well, if we find out about an error, we want to know exactly what happened in each one of those scenarios. And I think the first point of this needs to just be, hey, we had these issues. there's a number of them, and we have conversations about them so that we can all get buy-in from everyone of, hey, this was an issue. This blue wrap need to be commented on each time something goes wrong, or what is the most important piece for us to measure and find improvement on. Reducing, the number of times you're having to do same day turn, I think is one of those pieces that just creates chaos for SPD that OR doesn't quite think about, because they're not doing the coordination when they're scheduling cases with SPD to understand we only have 2 of those sets because it's a complex system and they don't have insights to it.
Yeah.
So I think, where are some of the successful measurements that you've been able, that you can think of that have driven anything at your facilities? And sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay, because I'm just sitting here reliving some of the frustrations, but also some of the wins that we have had in the past, because you're right when it comes to knowledge being power and knowing what you have and how important that is. Because I think a lot of times in the OR, we're running around with our hair on fire so much that we're not really thinking about anything other than, okay, I've got to get this case, I've got to get it set up, and then, okay, let's turn over and let's do it again. And I just need my stuff to be here. But if you don't have enough trays and if you don't have enough sets, sterile processing can only do so much to keep those things turned over if you're clipping along at a really fast rate. And in my previous position as a team leader for orthopedics, as our ortho business increased and we got busier and busier and we were working longer and longer, we just did not have the instrument sets to keep up. And especially with our power, it's like we need more power sets. We can't keep turning these over hoping that there's not a problem with one and only having enough power on 8 case cards when we've got 25 cases. Like we've got to keep going. And so really taking inventory of what we had, looking at how many cases we were doing, and that ability to forecast and project our volume was then able to help us say, yeah, we need to spend this money and we need to spend it yesterday and we need to get what we need. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, that makes total sense. I think it goes back to that knowledge is power component of being very empowering, especially for SPD, which is traditionally, a little bit more reactive, and they haven't taken time to take stock or take inventory because it's been so reactive. And I think anytime that you have the OR saying, all right, yeah, take time, take some resources and go and count how many you have if you don't have a tracking system, or go through and cleanse the tracking system. There's a lot of facilities that have implemented a system and only use one fraction of it, and they haven't continued to cleanse that data for useful information. But once you see and break down, and we've experienced this firsthand of having the reports of how many instruments are getting processed and have that be reliable, and how many sets are being processed on a daily basis, and how many times you're having to do same day turns, that's really empowering information that SPD can then go and make a business case that this is why we need to consign these sets, or this is why we need to buy these sets, or where I think is a lot of low-hanging fruit at a lot of facilities is why we need to liquidate these sets. It's some of the most expensive real estate in the world is hospitals, and how much room it takes. And I can't tell you how many times as a rep and in working with hospitals to develop software, we've walked in and seen sets that haven't turned in 4 or 5 years. It's on the sticker, and they're taking up several shelves of space, and that surgeon left, 2 years ago, and they just haven't turned. So I think that there's a lot of useful information that can be gathered. And I think focusing on getting reliable metrics, and it takes time too, because I think, again, said it multiple times on this in this conversation, but letting perfect be the enemy of good is you're not going to move anywhere. So just start with some broad numbers, and then you'll continue to shape those down into more reliable numbers. But understanding it's going to take some time to move there, kind of crawl, walk, run. And I think over the course of a number of months, even just early on, especially, I think you're going to find a lot of really valuable nuggets that help you build a business case for executives that they're going to support, because this is a collaborative effort. And then you can actually tie it in and have the perioperative support of, this is why we need it, we understand it, and we don't have to have 4 more meetings to present the idea, discuss, go back and forth. We're already aligned.
Yeah. And it really comes down to knowing what you have. And if you take the time to inventory and, like you said, read those stickers, and let's really take a hard look at the real estate that we are taking up. Is this something we need? Is it something maybe we should move to storage and hold on to just in case, but let's not keep it wrapped on the shelf for a just in case, just due to how long it's been since it's been used. But that could even be one of your first wins if you're looking at a small win. Now, granted, inventory is a big thing, but let's start by learning what we have. Do we have clue, right? We need to know.
It can be a valuable win too. Like there's dollars and cents to all of that inventory, and there are liquidation, providers out there that will just cut you a check based on what looks like you have, because they know that there's secondary markets that they can take those to. So everyone is looking for more money in their departments. You want a new sterilizer, you want a new, another part-time employee, something along those lines. It helps out a lot when you have the numbers in front of you and you have some budget to work with, and you can have a more meaningful business conversation with the people that are managing the numbers. Because if you don't have anything when you're coming to them, you're not set up for success.
Yep. It's the numbers that are going to tell the story, and the numbers that are going to help you make your case. Absolutely. All right. So we have come to the end of this 5th interview in this series. And everyone, if you're just tuning in, this is the 5th interview in our 12-part interview series with Jeff. But I highly encourage you to go back and check out episodes 1 through 4, and then join us next time for episode 6. We are continuing the idea and conversation of measuring and monitoring, and we're going to be discussing preference cards and forecasting and how that can help us improve and be more efficient. So don't miss it. On behalf of Jeff and myself, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of the First Case Expert series.